and this will also be shared on Facebook Live. So we'll wait for a few more folks to join, maybe wait another minute or so. All right. Well, we got a pretty good group here. So I'm going to start recording. Again, all of this will be recorded, shared to Facebook Live as well, and uploaded onto this Susitna River Coalition YouTube channel. If you would like to reference it later or share the talk with others that weren't able to attend. All right. So my name is Margaret Stern. I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Susitna River Coalition, and I am really happy that all of you are here tonight with Bruce Talbot and the SRC to chat about the Recreation Rivers Management Plan. Like I said, this is all being streamed on Facebook and being recorded. And we will have a question and answer session at the end of this. So hold your questions and we will get those covered. Bruce will get those covered as you have them. So on the screen as well, you will see Melissa Hoyer. She's the Executive Director of the Susitna River Coalition, and she will be in and out of this tonight. And I would also like to thank the Chase Community Council and the Talkeetna Community Council, as well as all of the generous donors, individual donors that make our winter speaker series events possible. Before I introduce Bruce Talbot, I would like to give a brief introduction to the Susitna River Coalition, Recreation Rivers, and why the Susitna River Coalition cares about them. First of all, the Susitna River Coalition is a grassroots organization based in Talkeetna. We first formed in response to the Susitna-Watana Hydro Dam project and have since broadened our scope to focus and follow issues that have the capacity to alter the broader Susitna River watershed. As Bruce will discuss in detail, the Susitna Basin Recreation Management Plan was first formed in 1991. It has effectively managed 6 waterways that it has designated as recreation rivers. In the 2021 legislative session, Senate Bill 97 that sought to repeal the REC Rivers designations was introduced. While it was not passed, it did bring attention to the management plan once again and led to the formation and appointment of a new advisory board. So this board has the potential to amend the management plan. And so the Susitna River Coalition has been following this all very closely to ensure that protections remain in place. The plan is still important to us because of large-scale development projects like the West Susitna Access Road, which is a 100-plus mile gravel industrial road that would cut through the heart of the West Susitna drainage. It would cross the Little Susitna, Alexander Creek, and cross just upstream of the Talachulitna, and these 3 waterways are recreation rivers. So thank you all for being here tonight. We are excited to learn more about the management plan, what it is, and why it's important. So now I'll introduce Bruce Talbot, who you are all here to see. Bruce Talbot received his bachelor's from the University of Vermont in wildlife management and a master's from Cornell in education, and he specialized in natural resource planning and policy. He has worked for federal and state land management agencies throughout his career, including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, and the National Park Service. He worked for many seasons in different national parks around the country, and first came to Alaska in 1980 as a seasonal naturalist and backcountry ranger at Denali. In 1984, he took a full-time job with the Alaska Department of Natural Resources and retired in 2009 as a senior land use planner. While at the Department of Natural Resources, he was the project manager for a number of different planning projects, and among them, the Susitna Basin Recreation Rivers Management Plan. He also helped with the Susitna Area Plan when he first began work with DNR, and also supervised the DNR staff reviewing federal plans for conservation system units, including Denali. and he contributed to both the joint DNR National Park Service visitor facility and access studies on both the north and south sides of Denali National Park. So thank you so much for being here today, Bruce. We're really excited to have you, and I will pass the screen over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Margaret. I'm really happy to join the group this evening. It's been 30 years since the plan has been adopted, so this is a good time to revisit it. And I hope for those of you that are just learning of it for the first time, or on the advisory board, or live in those areas, I can give you a little bit of background of the plan, the management plan, and how it got to be where it is today. It's still the existing plan for the 6 recreation rivers. The original idea for the Susitna rivers, recreation rivers, was in the Susitna Area Plan. That was adopted in 1985 after a 3-year project. It included about 33 to 35 public meetings. I participated in the tail end of that. And as you can imagine, there was extensive public comments, because none of the Susitna Basin, all the way up to past Chickaloon and all the way up to the upper Yetna and the borders of Denali National Park, had not been classified or planned for. And so this was the first shot at it. And so a lot of people were very interested in that. There were a number of state agencies that were involved. And through that process, they identified a lot of lands in the Susitna Basin for settlement, as well as many other uses, forestry, recreation, agriculture, and things like that. But settlement was a concern, and they wanted to make sure there were some corridors going through those areas that were retained in public ownership, that the public that was going to be moving out there or already lived out there could continue to use and have public access. So the number one priority for identifying these 6 rivers, and we'll show you a map of the rivers a little bit here, was to provide for public recreation. It also identified public access, fishing, hunting, floating, and power boating, general recreation. Water quality, of course, was very important. And they're particularly concerned about the fisheries and the fishery habitat, because, as you know, that's really the lifeblood of the upper Susitna, between the subsistence, recreation, and also the commercial fisheries down in the inlet. So they identified the 6 rivers, and pretty much from the mouth to the headwaters. And here's a good map of it. The rivers included the Little Sioux, the Talkeetna, the Moose Creek, Deshka, which includes Moose Creek and Croto Creek, Lake Creek, and Talachulitna and Alexander Creek. So with a few exceptions, the rivers were within 1/2 mile of the center line of the rivers, and they went pretty much from their mouths all the way up to their headwaters, with the exception of the Little Sioux. The lower Little Sioux is in the Susitna Flats State Game Refuge. And Alexander Creek, there's a little bit at the end that is not in the rec rivers, but it is, there's a lot of private land and some borough land there. They also said that in addition to those primary uses, timber management was a secondary use. And in the plan, they said land sales are prohibited. Mineral entry and coal leasing were prohibited. So after the Susitna Area Plan was adopted, there was a mineral closing order. So the only mines or mine claims on the rivers were those that were existing at the time the plan was adopted. And after that, no additional claims could be staked. And in addition to, so in 1988, the legislature passed the Recreation Rivers Plan or legislation, and it also provided an appropriation for planning. We also got somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 for data collection from the Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program, which provided us the resources. We did a 500-page, I can't see my face, but there's a 500-page resource assessment that identifies all the resources that are out there. The Recreation Rivers Act was one of the last legislatively designated areas in the last 30 years. I think it was Jay Kurtula and Sam Cotton were the ones that proposed it. Perhaps Pat Burchot was on the legislature then. It was under Governor Cooper. And as I say, there hasn't been a big legislative designation since then. There's been a hesitancy on the part of the legislature to do that. The purposes are pretty much reflected what the Susitna Area Plan called for. Maintenance and enhancement for recreation, fish and wildlife management, protection and maintenance, continued recreation and economic use, multiple uses, but only those that protect and mitigate impacts on water quality and stream flow, and accommodation of access for resource uses within or adjacent to the rivers. And it allowed for uses consistent with the management plan, including, and it had a whole list of uses, which included motorized timber harvest, gravel extraction, construction of recreational facilities. These are all consistent, as long as they're consistent with the management plan. And I'll get into some of those issues a little later. The other key provisions of the legislation was that we would reserve in-stream flow. So there was adequate water for recreation, water quality, and fish and game. And basically this means no dams are allowed anywhere on the 6 rivers. And as part of that, we did file an in-stream flow reservation to ensure there would be enough water for all those 3 uses from then into the future. It said we could regulate boating, and it also made clear that we couldn't usurp Fish and Game, DEC, other state agencies, or the borough. The borough continues to own land within the recreation rivers, and we worked with them on the plan to come up with a management that was consistent between the two, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It said we couldn't restrict firearms except where there was high use. The plan does get into that during the fishing season at the mouth of the Deshka, which at that time had up to 150 boats, the peak of Kings, but otherwise we couldn't restrict firearms. And it made it very clear that it couldn't be managed as a unit of the state park system. So that was something that, so the Division of Land manages it rather than the Division of Parks and Outdoor Recreation. And then finally, it said after the plan is all done, the legislature had the chance to review the plan, the final plan, and the proposed regulations before it could be adopted, which did occur. Some other things that were in the legislation, and so they're not necessarily open to changing the plan without changing the legislation. Timber harvest and gravel extraction are for personal use only. Once again, the only kind of mining, which would be on the existing claims because it's closed to new mineral entry, was through leasing, which requires some more stringent restrictions. And getting back to that, I think a lot of those existing claims 30 years ago may have gone away. So there may be even fewer mining claims in the 6 rivers than there were then. And it said it may allow for leasing for commercial facilities such as lodges, campgrounds, boat launches, encourage cooperative management agreements, and finalize that only the legislature could add additions to the recreation rivers. Through the planning process, we did propose a few minor additions to the headwaters of like Moose Creek and the Talkeetna and lower Alexander Creek. Those were never acted on by the legislature, but they're still in the plan. and by the fact that they are recommended for addition to the rec rivers, they can't be sold private, for private homes or that kind of thing. So I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about who developed the plan. Some of you are familiar with the advisory board. Originally in the legislation, there were 11 members of the board that were appointed by the governor, the board, the Office of Boards and Commissions. Within a year of the plan being started, the Mat-Su Borough went to the legislature and requested that 2 more members be added who were representatives of the Mat-Su Borough. So now there are 13 representatives on the board. That included, I'm just going through the list here, other recreational users, conservation, commercial fish, sport hunting, subsistence, forestry, mining, powerboat users, recreation-oriented users. That ended up being Chuck Heath, Sarah Palin's father. And he and his wife Sally actually floated the rivers for us. When I couldn't get on the rivers, they went out and helped with some of the inventory. The private property owners, that was Carl Dixon back then, who some of you may know, who used to own the lodge at the mouth of Lake Creek and now have a Finger Lake Lodge. And then 2 members of the Mat-Su Borough, Dorothy Jones, Bob Stickles was one of them, and then Paul Campbell and Delbert Hanrath, who I don't think came to the meetings, but those are the 2 other members. We also had technical advisors from the Park Service, particularly Jack Mosby and Doug Whitaker, who had a national experience in river management. And so they contributed some to the planning process, plus community advisors from all the communities in the area, including Susitna, Trapper Creek, the Fish Hook, Palmer, Wasilla, Alexander Creek, Willow, and Talkeetna. In addition to that, we had a planning team made up of all the different state agencies, and as well as the Mat-Su Borough and the city of Houston. The city of Houston was very concerned about the Little Sioux because their campground livelihood depended on the upper Little Sioux. And so the mayor was on the planning team. The advisory board, as it says in legislation, shall consult with, the commissioner will consult with the board in preparing, adopting, revising the plan and the regulations. So they are advisory, and the commissioner will consult with them on all the aspects of developing the plan, revising it, and the regulations. Okay. We had a number of public meetings. I was just looking over our plan here. We had anywhere between 20 and 25 public meetings. We also did 2 public surveys. One was we did a random survey of actual users on the river, and then we did another survey that anybody could fill out. So we used those for input. But our series of meetings started out with just issues identification, later alternatives, then draft plan, and then intent to adopt the final plan before it went to the legislature. So as I said, we had a lot of public input. We received all kinds of petitions. I remember our first meeting at Wendy Williamson in Anchorage. We had 150 people come to that very first meeting. So there was a lot of public interest at that time. Let's see. So the area addressed, as you saw earlier in that map, maybe we can see that again of the rec rivers. There's 460 river miles. It's about 260,000 acres, of which the state owns about 90% of it. 15,000 acres in it are in the borough, and that's the lower Deshka, the mouth of Alexander Creek, and the lower Little Sioux, just a little bit above the Little Sioux access point. There's about 4,000 acres of mental health land. That's just across the river from Talkeetna, north side of the Talkeetna River by its mouth. There's a little bit of university land there across the river from Talkeetna as well. And only about 1% of the land in the rec rivers is private. And those all became private through open entry, remote parcels, homesteads, lotteries, preference rights, a whole bunch of stuff that took place prior to ¡85. At the time we did the plan, we estimated that there were about 460 private parcels that were in or adjacent to the river corridors. And at that time, there were 30 lodges within the commercial lodges within the 6 rivers. I understand there may not be as many with the decrease in fish runs, but that's how many there were when we did the plan. The Fish and Game estimated that the use increased by 300%, and I think the 10 or 15 years before we started the planning process. We may have, it may have been that we were doing the planning process right at the peak of public use, at least the peak of fish runs. I understand since then, there's been closures like on the Deshka, the Kings aren't what they used to be. And so, and there aren't the number of lodges I've heard. So the use on the rivers is a little bit lower from perhaps fishing, but there are a lot more folks that have developed their private lands in and adjacent to the rivers. So there's a lot more use that way. And I'm sure there's a lot more winter use as well with snow machines. So the plan really doesn't address winter use in any way. It's primarily addresses the habitat use in the summer, habitat in general, and then summer uses. So looking at the 6 rivers, you can see there's a lot of land there, and it's a lot of variety. We have all the way from Talachulitna Lake. If you've never been up there, that's a spectacular lake. It's got beautiful views of the Alaska range. Then you've got all the way down to Little Sioux, which is almost an urban river at times, close to Houston and down by the mouth. You've got Talkeetna, that's right, of course, right next to the community. So there's a variety of different situations there. And so one size doesn't fit all. And so we came up with a classification system for the rivers: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Class 1 is generally the headwaters of these rivers that receive the lowest amount of use. And those areas were designated in the management plan for primitive recreational opportunities. Then the Class 2 areas were recreational opportunities in a semi-primitive setting. That's generally in the mid reaches of these rivers. And then the Class 3 was recreational opportunities more in a developed setting. That would be down at the mouth of the Deshka, mouth of Lake Creek, around Clear Creek on the Talkeetna, mouth of Alexander Creek, places where there's lots of folks. In addition, on some of these more remote parts of the rec rivers, there were private lands and also high-use public use sites. So where there are these clusters of private homes and lands in the mid reaches of these rivers, and where they were in Class 1 areas that were for primitive recreational opportunities, we designated those areas special management areas to allow for the private owners to access their lands, to build a dock if they needed, and the general developments that are associated with those private lands. We didn't want to leave them hanging up there in Class 1 areas with primitive opportunities only, because they were private lands. The other thing that we did is we went through all the 6 rivers and we found the highest use areas and made special provisions for them. And we called those public use sites. There's about 73 of them. They're particularly important for public access for fishing, camping, and other public uses. Those are areas that we want to be particularly careful of in the future. If we had funding, those might be places where we develop primitive campsites, privies, kiosks, signs, things that would support the public use there, including maybe even if there was enough money, drinkable, potable water. Then in addition to that, we were concerned about lifeblood of the 6 rivers and the fish they support. So we called them riparian management areas, and we had hydrologists go and map all the swamps and creeks and wetlands that drain into the rivers. This is where a lot of our salmon spawn. And for those, we had some special provisions in the 100-year floodplain as well. And there were some special provisions for like a 100-foot setback. I think at the time the borough had 75-foot setbacks for development. I don't know what it is now, but back then it was 75 feet. Then I heard later it was 35 feet. I don't know what the borough has now, but the plan calls for setbacks for structures being 100 feet. Of course, that doesn't apply to docks. Let's see. Then so that's the beginning of the plan, and then we went issue by issue through the plan. We call those Chapter 2 guidelines, and I'll just touch on some of the provisions in the plan that affect some of the development might occur there. For example, for upland development, that was a section in the plan. We do not allow trapping cabins in the plan and remote cabins, though tents are okay up to 4 days. And that 4-day provision only applies during the fishing season. We, through those surveys with the members of the public, on general state lands, it's 14 days. Well, that is often the whole fishing season for some of these reaches of the river. And one of the problems we were having, like on the Deshka, people would go, they would set up a camp even before fishing season, and they would leave it there for the whole summer. Sometimes they wouldn't even take it down in the winter and be there in the next year, just so that they could have a site reserved. So the public was more supportive of a 4-day limit on tent camps. Trapping cabins, once again, the rivers are, it's only half a mile from a river, so there's plenty of land out there for trapping cabins. They don't have to be right on the side of a river. We've seen that in the past used as an excuse for putting in a private cabin on public land. Even agency resource camps like fish and game camps, there was one at the mouth of Deshka. I don't know if it's still there. We required they be kind of out of sight or at least 100 feet away from the shoreline and the wetlands. As far as the shoreline development, and of course that was the biggest concern for, so we don't really diminish the value of the fish habitat. The Kenai River Center, which had all the multi-agencies, were down there in Soldotna. They had just developed the Kenai Area Plan. And a lot of people said, this is not going to be another Kenai River. And we said, no, we didn't go to those people because we wanted horsepower limits or that kind of thing. These people were really the experts on the kinds of development that could really diminish the smolts and the spawning beds and the migration of fish. And so we asked them for some of the provisions that they thought were most important. And of course, any form of bank disturbance is a big concern. Down there, if they want to stabilize banks, they were cabling trees, fallen trees to the bank. So it provides smolt habitat, but it isn't like some of the things that people were starting to build on the Kenai River and also on the wreck rivers for that matter. They're putting in groins, bulkheads, jetties, dolphins, gabions, matsu. The Matsu cars in the river to stabilize the banks in front of their homes. So we didn't really want any of that going on in the rivers because it just changes the whole dynamics of the river. Not to mention some of them were safety hazards. Some of them changed the whole course of the river so that the whole river would start meandering in a different way and start eroding the guy on the other side of the river. So those aren't allowed. As I mentioned before, the legislation pretty much prohibits any major dams on the rivers, though dams on minor tributaries could be built for fish enhancement. And Fish and Game has done this even on the drainages of the Kenai River. Also, you'll see when you go up to Portage Glacier, Fish and Game, the Forest Service has some ponds along the river, which they had used for gravel to build the road, but now they have been built in a way for fish enhancement. So that is allowed, but on the very minor tributaries, and I'm not aware that any of that has been done. We also addressed in shoreline development buoys and anchors. People were establishing buoys at the mouth of Lake Creek and at the mouth of the Deshka to hog a fishing site before they even got there. And it would exclude other people from using those areas. So we no longer allow people to set anchors and buoys in advance to reserve a fishing site. And those were the two rivers that were a concern. The other thing that was a big concern of the Deshka was a real mess when we started this plan. There were all kinds of boats, derelict boats that people had left, and they had accumulated over the years. As I mentioned before, there were a lot of old camps that people walked away with, all kinds of visqueen and that kind of thing, privies that had fallen down. The place was a real mess. And so we allowed boat storage or just keeping your boat there for 4 days, but no longer than you could camp there. You could leave them there for a little bit in the off season for 14 days, but certainly not over the winter. Let's see. Of course, you can leave your boats and commercial camps on private land. Another issue was docks. We had some huge docks going in at the mouth of the Deshka, adjacent to some of the lodges that were blocking public access. So through the planning process, we limited docks to 100 square feet. And they couldn't extend more than 15 feet from the water's edge. You get much further than that, some of these rivers are pretty narrow and it starts to get in the way of navigation. And of course, these have to be removed in the winter, otherwise they just become trash in the lower river when the ice clears them out. Construction materials, we don't want them made out of styrofoam. Maybe you've been on some of the lakes where people have styrofoam lakes and all the styrofoam ends up all over the edges of the lakes for years and years. Treated material, that kind of thing, which is toxic to fish, isn't allowed. And then the plan also encourages community docks. So if you're going to build a dock, build one for you and your neighbors. Don't everybody get their own dock. And so that was just just encouragement, but it wasn't a regulation. And then finally, we had at the mouth of Lake Creek, we had some guy floating around with a Cinzano umbrella for a bar floating at the mouth of Lake Creek. He didn't even have a liquor license. We've also experienced in other places, floating facilities, float homes, that kind of thing. People were floating around at the mouth of the Deshka selling knickknacks. So that's prohibited. You can't be bending things and hawking, Budweisers on any of the rivers. Okay, for upland development, a lot of folks were concerned about stream crossings. I know this West Susitna road is kind of in the headlines lately. What it says in the legislation is that the rivers and the designation of the rivers should not be an undue impediment to development within and across the corridors. So river crossings were not prohibited by the legislation. However, through the planning process, we did put some provisions on it. We knew that there was, for example, many section lines. I think there were hundreds of section lines that cross the rivers or adjacent to the rivers, and those do have some legal access. But we just encouraged if there was crossings that they place the crossings in preferred locations, that there be provisions for habitat protection, that the either side of them don't mess up the hydrology, so it changes the whole river. Adequate clearance for public users. The construction season, we don't want it happening at the height of the spawning and fishing season. And of course, materials. We don't want them filling, for example, huge amounts of gravel or what have you into the rivers to build the crossings. In general, the plan encourages the crossings to be in class 2 or 3 areas. These are the lower parts of the rivers rather than up in the upper reaches. We do have some river crossings, as you know already. I think Schrock Road on the Little Sioux, of course, the Parks Highway in the Little Sioux. The Talkeetna has, of course, the railroad bridge. So there are a couple crossings up there. The Little Sioux only goes up to the bridge that enters Hatcher Pass, and then at that point, above that, it's in the Hatcher Pass management area. So that those are just a few the bridges that are there. I think there's one on the oil railroad that goes across Moose Creek to Amber Lake. That was another one that hadn't been developed at the time we did the plan, but it was had been built since. So there are a couple crossings already, but it doesn't prohibit roads from crossing the river. We just came up with some mitigating factors that would hopefully prevent impact on public recreation and habitat. So another area-wide provisions we had for recreation, tent camps 4 days during the fishing season. Can't store equipment for long periods. We'd like to have some public use cabins out there, though there's never been money for them. So there has never been public use cabins built on the rivers. As I mentioned earlier, weapons, there's no restriction on firearms, except it was encouraged that it not occur at the mouth of the Deshka because of the number of public that are there for a month or 6 weeks. We discourage events. Now, some places have fishing derbies where it was crowding at the time when we were doing this in the early 90s, late 80s. So having large fishing derbies and big events was pretty much discouraged and would require a permit. We had enough fishermen as it was out there. Then even Fish and Game wasn't too excited about fishing derbies during the height of the season. Can't mark natural objects. People are spray painting trees and rocks in the middle of the river and that kind of thing. That's generally a no-no in most natural areas nationwide. You got to put up a sign, but don't spray paint rocks and attach things to trees and natural objects. Does allow for some temporary closures. The only ones I could really think of is maybe a bear, a problem bear in a certain area where people were camping. And then continued monitoring. We want to continue to monitor the uses, particularly in the class 1 areas, to make sure that people are having kind of a wild experience up there and not feeling too crowded. And we, through our survey, had determined what kind of experience those people wanted, both on the upper reaches and on the lower reaches. And people were pretty comfortable with the number of people they saw now, except for some of the crowded days in the river mouths. But for the most part, they didn't want to see a lot of additional crowding going on. So we, in the plan, recommend more monitoring and also occasionally surveying the public and seeing if their attitudes have changed. To my knowledge, that hasn't occurred. It does require additional money to do that, but it would be nice if it did occur. As far as fish and wildlife habitat that applies to all 6 rivers, pretty much, I won't get into all the details, but bald eagles, which are pretty much protected by federal guidelines anyway. Sioux Forest guidelines, which overlaps this, also has a setback for 660 feet between March 15th and August 31st. Of course, bears and garbage, there's waste disposal provisions for that. Grazing is prohibited except incidental to pack animals. So there was no grazing in the rec rivers that I was aware of. However, I think there's maybe one isolated parcel in the Little Sioux that might have a grazing permit. I think we addressed that in the Little Sioux unit, but overall, no grazing allowed, except if you're using pack animals for a temporary access to the rivers. We recommended commercial use permits because there wasn't really any funding source to manage the rivers. So commercial users would have to get a permit. It was about $150, I think, way back when. And then perhaps a day use fee or a client fee. Those were never implemented, but it was envisioned that that would help provide some revenue so that the rivers could be managed. I'm just looking at my time here, so I don't run over too much. Let's see, it also, because it required a commercial permit, then it would provide some grounds for regulating some of the uses. We were getting a lot of complaints about some of the commercial uses. Some people didn't have, some of the commercial users didn't have fishing licenses, some had broken the laws, some were undergoing unsafe practices, getting a lot of complaints, that kind of thing. And so by getting requiring a permit, some of those outlaw commercial users, you could get a little bit of a handle on that. And that was to protect public safety and also improve the experience of the other users on the river. Let's see. Oh, I should also mention, it was a big deal during the planning process. A lot of people wanted us to get into fishing game management and fishing and hunting regulations. DNR has no authority over those, but there was a lot of folks that people are snagging fish, they're keeping over their limit, that kind of thing. And all we could do is pass that on to Fish and Game, who could pass it on to what we called at the time the brown shirts, Fish and Wildlife Protection. But we had no authority over that. And we still have no authority over that. One of the issues that I saw in some of the news releases, there was a concern about the current plan, and it prohibits new lodges. So I thought I would get into that a little bit. The plan, and I'll tell you how it addresses new lodges. At the time we were doing the plan, as I mentioned earlier, there were 30 lodges on the rivers, active lodges, and there were about 460 private parcels in or along the corridors. People at the time thought there was enough public use as it was. There was crowding, and they didn't want to see them, in particular, the plan said not in class 1 areas. So we pretty much did prohibit new lodges in the rec rivers, but the plan also calls for a review of that stipulation in the plan revision. So that's something the advisory board might look at. I should point out, however, in my experience in 25 years with DNR, I don't know of a single lodge that has been built on a lease. And the reason is when someone wants to have a lease on public land, first of all, they want to get a loan from a bank. They can't get loans. Generally, it's very difficult to get a loan from a bank when you only have a lease on the land. The other thing is that for a lodge to be built on any state lands, it goes out for public review. And judging from what we heard at the planning process, when it goes out for public review, the applicant just becomes subject to a lot of comments, negative comments and what have you. So what we found in the past, after that experience, people who want to build lodges on public land generally go to looking at private land. And there is a lot of private land out there. So anyway, that's why I only know of one lodge on state land, and this was 30 years ago. It could still be that way, subject to a lease, and that was only because the lodge was illegally built on state land, and it was in a legislatively designated area, so we couldn't sell it to them. So they had to pay annual lease payments. Let's see. as far as commercial camps, these are just these tent camps. There were 9 on the rivers at the time we were doing it. And these were sport fishing guides. There were some in the lower Deshka and lower Alexander Creek. I recollect there might have been some on the Little Sioux as well, but maybe those were on borough land. But anyway, based on the number of camps in 1988, we said that the plan says that I think there can only be 9 of these commercial camps on the rivers. Let's see, and those camps can't block public access, be below ordinary high water or near heritage sites. And they can't be in public use sites because as I mentioned earlier, there were, what, 73 of them, and those are the highest use areas, and we didn't want to have commercial use mixed in with the public use. Now that number 9 can be readdressed. Things have changed since the plan was adopted 30 years ago, but I don't know how many sport fish camps are out there now. Maybe less, maybe more, I don't know. The most controversial thing when we started the plan was on boating restrictions. There was all kinds of letters. The editor on the Little Sioux, Craig Medred, wrote a whole bunch of stuff about it. As any of you have floated the lower Little Sioux, it's very narrow. And when power boats are going upriver or downriver, or airboats, they really can't get off step because it is so shallow. So when there's a canoeist or a floater, someone in a raft going upriver, and they can't really get out of the way in time at times, or even if they can, there's big wash, and there's a lot of yelling back and forth. So that was the big issue at the time. But there was also concern about the Talachulitna, Lake Creek, the Deshka, Alexander Creek, Little Sioux, as I mentioned, and the Talkeetna. So we did go and address those. For the most part, other than the Little Sioux, we basically said the upper reaches, which were for the most part not even navigable by power boats, they're very shallow and rocky, were restricted to non-powered boats. And as I said, most of those were not even power boatable anyway, except perhaps by airboats once in a while. And that was to provide for a range of recreational experiences on all the 6 rivers. So there could be places where people could get a kind of wilderness experience. People could get the experience like on the lower Deshka. Some people really enjoy watching other people fish like they do at the mouth of the Russian River. So there's a range of experiences there. Also, it was for boating safety. Once again, I mentioned that. And it was also for people that are out on a float trip, generally don't want to hear a lot of noise. Now, one thing that people did bring up and they were concerned about was erosion, bank erosion, and the impacts on fish. So we did look into that, and unfortunately or fortunately, there's really no way to disaggregate the erosion caused by power boats versus the erosion that occurs particularly in the spring when all the ice is breaking up and tearing down the river and pulling up roots and chewing away at people's banks and that kind of thing. There's not like a standard river that you can compare each of these rivers to see the difference between one river that has power boats and one that doesn't. So we did not address that issue. And we also did not address the issue of do power boats and jet units in particular affect fish habitat. There was only one study at the time done in New Zealand where they showed that jet units, the pressure difference did affect the eggs in the gravels, but that was about all that was existing. So at the time they said that the Department of Interior, Fish and Game, and University of Alaska were looking into some of this stuff, but I don't know if they have or not. So the only reason for 5 of the 6 rivers to restrict was based on a non-motorized experience and for safety, not for habitat or bank erosion. And a side note, Talkeetna really wanted, also because of the noise in the middle of the night, because of the homes along the river. And they understand since that Fish and Game has restricted sport fishing in the middle of the night upriver. So that addressed that issue. I don't know if erosion's still an issue there, but that was one thing that Talkeetna residents were concerned about. On the Little Sioux, we had 20, so we couldn't, everybody had a different suggestion how to solve that issue between the floaters and the power boaters. So first of all, we did not make any restrictions above Nancy Lake Creek because the campgrounds in Houston depend on the people staying in their campgrounds going down to the mouth of Nancy Lake Creek and fishing. And the only way you can get there is to go down there in a power boat and go back up. So Miller's Landing and there's another campground there. The city of Houston was really opposed to restricting power boats on that section of the river, so we didn't. So between Nancy Lake Creek and down, almost down to the Little Susitna put-in off the Burma Road, we had the advisory board vote on 24 alternatives, and we went through rounds. It's kind of like ranked choice voting. We went through 24 rounds with them because everybody had a different idea. And basically what we came up with is an alternating weekends during the fishing season. One weekend it's power boats only. The other weekend it's floaters only. That was to ensure that power boaters, if they went up, they weren't gonna have to go off step when they ran into floaters. And for floaters, when they went down the river, they wouldn't be terrified by airboats and jet units going upriver. And so that was put into regulation. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I saw one little chat thing, but.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. This is awesome to get such a broad overview, and it's really interesting to hear how comprehensive and how much foresight went into the creation of this plan. So we do have some questions here. And one was, were the in-stream flow reservations approved?
In-stream flow reservations, I wanted the applications to be filed, and they were. We sent out our Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys to, well, first of all, we had some stream gauge data, but there wasn't much. So they went out and put out more stream gauges. We had Doug Whitaker, who has done a lot of river planning throughout the lower 48. He went out and interviewed all the boaters, power boaters and floaters, and said, how much water do you need in this river to do what you're doing now? And so we determined how much water was necessary for the power boaters, floaters, and then water quality as well. And Fishing Game said, basically, if you've got those two covered, there'll be enough water for fish. So we filed all this data. It has not been adjudicated. Despite my urgings over the years, and they assured me the law of the land is first in time, first in line. In other words, whoever files first gets first dibs on all the water. So if there's a competing application, like say Houston wanted to tap the Little Sioux for a major municipal drinking water source or a ski area or something like that, they would adjudicate the application filed by DNR for the in-stream flow. And if there was additional water available, then the competing user could have that, but no more than that would infringe on that. So as far as I know, those are still sitting there. I do know that Fish and Game, even before the plan, filed in-stream flow in the upper Little Sioux because there was concern about snowmaking on Government Peak way back when. So they wanted to get ahead of that. So on the upper Little Sioux, there is an in-stream flow reservation. but not related to recreation rivers. So other question?
Let's see. So there aren't any questions on Facebook right now. Does anybody else have anything from the audience right now?
Because I can cover, there are some other things I can cover. I just wanted to, I know I've been talking without a break, so I just want to, and I can leave some space at the end too for more questions. I did want to get to some of the other issues.
Okay. Well, Laura Wright asks, she's curious how much pushback there was on the plan, if any.
The pushback on the plan, of course, we went through so many comment periods, and we did do that random survey on the rivers, and we also sent out a survey to whoever wanted them. I think the major thing was some of the powerboat constituents went to their legislators and were, they just didn't want any restrictions on powerboats at all. And so there was a little bit of legislation proposed that I don't even think got hearings to reverse the powerboat restrictions. But other than that, there were so many hundreds or thousands of people that commented. But I would say that was probably the one that people felt strongly enough. But then of course you had all the other users out there. And as I say, we didn't restrict where powerboats could go. The Matsu Borough, I should say, also signed off on the plan. We went into the plan hoping that the borough would come up with management intent for their important areas, particularly the mouth of Deshka. But in the end, they just said, put in the plan for management intent on borough lands, ask the borough. So, but after the plan was developed, since the borough owned most of the uplands on the lower Deshka, we owned a little bit of the uplands, but we did own the water bottom. After the plan was adopted, a management agreement was issued to the borough, and they started managing the lower Deshka. They set up the campground, they set up signs, informations, long-term camping areas, short-term camping areas. There was a hazardous airstrip that was closed there. I think they've walked away from it in recent years, but they were actively managing the mouth of Deshka, which was a good thing. But the borough ended up being fairly supportive of the plan. Let's see, I did boating. We had no wake areas proposed. Obviously, the amount of the Deshka, when you had 150 boats there, you don't want to be roaring through there at high speed. Those were also called for at the mouth of Lake Creek. That was a real popular fishing area at the time. Also Alexander Creek, though it's not in the rec rivers, but that got real busy early season for Kings. And then the Little Susitna access, which is still there off the Burma Road. We didn't want people roaring by there. So let's see, personal watercraft. They were pretty much, they are banned in the rec rivers. We made the exception. Some of the rec rivers overlapped with the Susitna by Talkeetna, the Squetna. I think the Tal and overlaps with it a little bit, the wide part of the river. And the Yetna, mouth of Lake Creek, is quite wide there. But personal watercraft, even the power boaters wanted us to prohibit them. They didn't feel that it was, they were fiberglass hulls then, it was dangerous for them. It just wasn't, people were there to fish and recreate for other reasons, and they just didn't want to see jet skis zipping around. And so they are prohibited, and we didn't get any pushback on that at the time at all. As you know, with the Ketchikan Bay issue and that kind of thing, it's a different issue today. But back then, it really wasn't controversial at all. As I mentioned earlier, there's really no restrictions on snow machines and winter access. There's a little bit on vehicles over 1,000 pounds because there were bulldozers going out to Upper Lake Creek to mining claims and things like that. So there were some restrictions on that to make sure there was adequate ground cover, frozen ground and snow on the ground. But for the most part, snow machines weren't restricted.
Great. Well, there are a bunch of questions that are starting to come in.
Okay.
So I'll ask you a few others. Robin says, thank you for talking today. How do you think this will impact the West Road, and why is the governor trying to change this now?
Well, you know, I retired in 2009, so
It's a big one.
I'm not privy to what the governor's thinking is, and I'm not even sure, you know, whether anybody other than the governor's office knows. But you know, I've heard there's some issues up there at Judd Lake. There are jet skis zipping around. There's a big dock going in there, or is in there, and so there have been complaints about that over the years in any of these legislatively designated areas. I remember when I was helping with the Kenai Charisma plan much years later, there was some push to open the area up for land sales, but that's totally speculation. I have not heard that from any reliable source at all.
Okay.
West Susitna access road, I don't know. The plan does allow for it. I mean, it's got some mitigation there. Don't screw up the river when you cross it, and try to do it in some logical places. Some of you people know more about it than I do. When I look at that map, it would go across the Little Sioux, Alexander Creek or Lake. I don't know, probably the creek, maybe go north of it. I don't know. And then the Talachulitna.
Okay.
But the plan does not preclude access to resources, you know, adjacent to the rivers. So, and that's in legislation.
Perfect. Well, thank you. That was a big question. Another one that Robin has is, what are your biggest concerns, and what do you think the public needs to know as we enter into the comment period and advisory board or management plan revision process?
Well, things have changed. It's 30 years. I have been a little out of touch there. We've got the plan has some regulations in there that were never implemented. You can read through the plan and see those. We've never gotten appropriation to do anything with the rivers. Division of Land personnel will go out there once in a while to check on a violation or a permit or this or that, but for the most part, they haven't. They're not able to get out there on a regular basis. When they created the Jim Creek public use area, they did give DNR citation authority and some money to clean that place up. That did not occur with recreation rivers. Okay. And just to revisit some of these issues that are out there. My biggest concern is that the lifeblood of these rivers is the habitat and the wetlands that feed them, and the vegetation along the rivers and in the rivers. Public uses can change from day to day. Public use can go up, public use can go down. Fisheries can be closed one season, open the next. But you know, once you start putting in jetties and gabions and redirecting the river and toxic things in the river, or cutting down all the vegetation adjacent to the river, or putting large developments adjacent to the rivers, you know, it's only half mile on either side. There's plenty of land out there in the Susitna Area Plan for all those kinds of uses, and just keep the rivers in their healthy state, allow for public to continue to use them, and that's my major concern. That's 50 years, 100 years from now. That's what's going to make a difference to future generations. A lot of these public uses, they come and go and change over the years, and they should maybe be revisited depending on things have changed. But my major concern, and the reason that we did survey and map all the wetlands and the stream flow, is to ensure that there's adequate water and the quality of the water and the habitat in and adjacent to the rivers, so we still have something to work with. You just don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
Great.
So,
Great, thank you.
yeah.
So a couple more questions here. What percentage of users have their opinions and views typically captured during those surveys that you were talking about? How many folks do you think answer?
Oh boy. You know, I'd have to go back. Those things are all still probably in our files, but we had, I'd say, a couple hundred random users, you know, that were actually handed out. We had someone in fishing game or that was handing out surveys on the river. We just wanted to get random users. Then we had a big newspaper thing that got sent out to, I don't know, 500, 700 people. And then all these rounds of public comments, both public meetings with 30, 35 public meetings, and then all the comments that were submitted at each of the 3 or 4 rounds of public meetings. So what was the question again?
The question was,
oh, what got our attention?
What percentage of users had their opinions and views typically captured during one of these surveys? It's amazing to think, like, before the internet, how this was all done.
Oh gosh. You know, it isn't necessarily numbers. Even if one person has a really good suggestion and it really makes sense, and the advisory board looks at it and the planning team looks at it, it was like, yeah, that's a really great idea. Let's incorporate that in the plan. If we've got a petition with 2,000 petitions, signatures, yeah, it gets our attention. It gets the attention. Those are often forwarded to legislators and the governor and the commissioner. But, you know, maybe they don't make sense, or maybe there's something that's a petition against something that's in legislation, and the advisory board and DNR can't do anything about without the legislature doing something about it. So I just recommend that comments be cordial and polite. Let folks know what you like about the plan, what you don't like about the plan. The advisory board members are new. I think it's listed on the website there, that talk to your advisory board members. Some of them are fairly new to the rivers, and they'd like to hear. They represent different users. So look up on the website. I'll give you that a little later. And you can talk to the individual advisory board members and say, hey, I'm a sport fisher and this is my concern, or, you know, I'm a landowner or whatever, because those are all represented on the advisory board.
Great. Well, another question says, over the years, how is compliance with the plan monitored and enforced?
Well, I don't think it was that well implemented as far as the public use things, because we didn't have any money. I think when people applied for things that required permits, then they had to, it had to be compliant with the plan. So if someone wanted to put in a dock or some sort of structure or commercial fish camp or a road or a utility or something on public lands, or existing mine claimant wanted to do something on their land, they were reviewed by DNR. But as far as Division of Land staff going out on the river on a regular basis, they did off and on, but usually if it was something like that, it would often be response to complaints. Okay. And that's not that unusual. I did the plan for Wood-Tichchik State Park as well. They had 10 lakes, 2.2 million acres, 1 ranger. So, and they had citation authority in state parks. They don't on the rec rivers. And the only way the ranger really was aware of what was going on out there was to get complaints, or commercial operators were out there on a daily basis. And they said, hey, this is going on, this isn't right, whatever. So that's kind of the case with DNR now, because they just don't have a, they don't have a person designated to the rec rivers to go out. What is there, 400 and some odd miles of river? So, you know, it's pretty hard to get on all those rivers. You can't even really do it well in one season, let alone on a regular basis. And at all times of year when the different uses are occurring.
Right. Sue says, thank you for the overview. The director of DNR has released a best interest finding for gas exploration licenses that cover 900,000 acres across 3 or 4 of these rec rivers.
Okay.
And then states, does the plan address upland noise and its impact on the recreation rivers?
Okay, for as far as subsurface, as I say, it's close to new mineral entry. While I'm looking at these notes here, there were a few claims on Middle Lake Creek, Talachulitna Canyon, the mouth of the Tal, and on Clear Creek, but and then of course Lake Creek. But I don't know; those are still there. So that's and those all have to go to lease, and those are renewed every 5 years. So that addresses those. They can't have any living quarters associated. We did have one person that bought a mining claim thinking they could live on Upper Lake Creek. And we go, nope, you can't do it. You can find a spot outside the corridor, but you can't use a mining claim as an excuse to have a nice little cabin, recreational cabin on the river. As far as oil and gas leasing is okay. However, any of the facilities like the well rigs or whatever have to be can't be within 500 feet of the I can't remember if it's the river or the corridor, but I think it encourages them to be at least a half mile away. Okay. So and it says leasing is okay for oil and gas, but pipeline crossings and docks and roads, those things that I mentioned earlier, which relate to all kinds of crossing the river for transportation purposes, have to abide by the plan. But leasing is not for oil and gas is not precluded by the plan.
Okay, so like the Donlin natural gas pipeline, that could be something that wouldn't be allowed to cross, or?
Well, it could be allowed to cross, yes.
Okay.
But leasing, well, I'll tell you, even when I was helping with the Kenai River Plan, there was a oil and gas lease sale for land under the Kenai River. Oh. But if you read the, whatever they called it, when they made it available for people to bid on, I don't think it was bid on, it made it clear that any of these facilities, drill rigs, I guess in particular, could not be within a certain distance of the river. And as you know, they can directional drill almost anywhere these days, miles out, offshore or under lakes or even on the rec rivers without anybody knowing, no impacts.
Okay. Well, we've had some, we've had what are your biggest concerns over the process, but what are your biggest hopes of the outcomes of the process with the Rec Rivers Board, Advisory Board? Well,
I hope they are able to hear from the public and see what what's changed since the plan was adopted. And I hope they don't get too overwhelmed with the amount of research that we did back then. I mean, we had quite a bit of resources and a time frame to do that kind of stuff, which I know it's limited now. And I should also point out that the planners in DNR have a lot of things going on. So it's a small unit. It was when we had more people actually when I was there. Nowadays, the planning unit is a lot smaller. I think we had 25 planners in our planning group back then. It's not that way anymore. Yeah. So I think tweaking the plan where it really matters and where it looks like significant changes are made. But I don't know that each and every aspect of the plan needs to be revisited and changed. I think there are some things in there that can be looked at, particularly as related to the level of public use, which has changed so much. My understanding, like Alexander Creek, it's full of pike now. I don't know that the fishing is certainly not what it used to be. And as far as the number of lodges out there, probably a lot less. The Deshka, doesn't have the high public use. So maybe some of those crowding issues that we had restrictions on, there's no need for them for some of those busy areas because there aren't that many people there anymore. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm just looking at a couple other things. Susitna, the lower Susitna, we were encouraging a management agreement with Fish and Game because that's in the Susitna Flats. That never really occurred, but we would like to manage that consistently with the whole river, and Fish and Game was open to that at the time. I hope they retain the land and state ownership. I hope there isn't a proposal for major land sales along the river. That could really be a problem. And I just don't. I never sensed the public was in favor of that. Anyway, so and maybe DNR getting some citation authority, which we never got. It said in the legislation that we could designate peace officers, but the legislature never gave DNR any citation authority. So if someone litters out there, the only thing a DNR peace officer could do would to take them to civil court, which is, yeah, this is not going to happen. No AG is going to take that case. It's too much work. So really some of those violations we can't enforce. The troopers and the Fish and Wildlife Protection can do some of the stuff, but DNR employees cannot. And I think that's it. I had some river by river issues here, but I can just touch on those real quickly because I know people that are listening are interested in their individual rivers and what the issues were 30 years ago. And I'll do it fairly quickly. Houston on the Little Sioux was very concerned about the fish weir. The fish weir counted the number of fish. And so when they found that there wasn't adequate escapement, they would say, no more fishing. Well, the weir would, before the fish ever got up to Nancy Lake Creek in Houston, they would close the fishery. So Houston did not like the fish weir and were claiming that it blocked fish passage. But I mean, the real issue was the fish were all getting intercepted on the lower river. And the weir would show that, and then they would close it before the fish ever got up to Houston. There was a proliferation of foot trails adjacent to the Little Susitna access. So people are trampling a lot there. That's probably still going on. They were proposing a South Big Lake Road extension just above the Little Sioux access across the Little Sioux. That has not occurred, but we made some provisions there because we knew there would be a lot of public use there if it was built. The plan overlaps with the Nancy Lake recreation area, so that's dual designated in some areas. So anyway, that's just Little Sioux. Deshka, as I mentioned, that was all the crowding, the float planes and the boat storage. A lot of off-road vehicle damage by Croto and Moose Creek by the Petersville Road. Any of you been up there? You've seen a lot of shredding of and I'm sure it's a lot worse than it was then. We did propose a trail management plan to address some of that stuff so that people would use the same trail. That management plan has never been developed. Let's see, we proposed Upper Moose Creek, Cada Lake be added to the rec rivers. That's upper Moose Creek, and that was never added. It's the headwaters of the river. It does have fish runs. Talkeetna, as I mentioned, noise and erosion. That partially was addressed by Fish and Game regs. Clear Creek was a real mess back then, and there was a lodge collapsing into the river. I don't know if it's still there. They wanted to do a land exchange, and we said, no, we're not exchanging it because you'll just give us, we'll get your lodge, and what we'll get is a rundown lodge, and that'll wash away. I don't know if that ever happened, but Clear Creek was really disgusting at the time. I personally knew some folks that got some bad giardia fishing there over a weekend. We also proposed adding the upper Talkeetna up into the canyon. up to mile 51.5. That requires legislation. That didn't occur. Lake Creek, as I said, people were putting out buoys and hogging sites there. So we had recommendations about buoys and plane landing. Planes are landing near where people are fishing. There was some unauthorized cabins that I think one of them on Talachulitna Lake's since been removed. There's an airstrip on Talachulitna Lake, and we just recommend retain it. It was in BLM ownership. Let's see. I think there's too much more. Alexander Creek, we were proposing adding a little bit of lower Alexander Creek to the Wreck River so we could address some of the public uses and crowding that was occurring down there. I don't know if that's an issue anymore. That was about 115 additional acres proposed. It was never added. So anyway, we got some minor additions through legislation. None of those were acted on. It's not a lot of acreage. I think that's pretty much it. So I look forward to the advisory board looking at the plan again. I know it's a lot to look at, though. I know each one is designated to look at and represent particular interests. So you don't necessarily have to read the whole thing, but look at some of those particular areas that you represent. My hopes are for, maintaining, even with the revision, with maintaining great habitat, stream flow, and continuing to provide for quality recreation and subsistence and tourism opportunities for now and the future. So
great. Thank you so much for this super comprehensive overview of the plan. We do have one more question and then we'll totally wrap it up.
Okay.
Mike Williams asks, can composition of the advisory board be modified? And if so, who has the authority to enact a change?
That would require an act of the legislature. As we found with the addition of the 2 additional Matsu representatives, the borough went to the legislature and added those 2 additional people. And then it was up to the, boards and commissions theoretically appoints all board members, but I'm sure they just went to the borough and asked the borough, who would you like to represent us? The borough. So, but it can only be done through legislation. Yeah. Anyway.
Great. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for providing such a comprehensive overview. It's really nice to hear about how thorough the plan was and how much foresight and work and just all the time and effort that was put into it. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Margaret and Melissa. I should also add, if you want to see the plan, it is on the web. Google Susitna Basin Recreation Rivers Management Plan, and it'll pop up on the DNR website. And then when you get to that site, if you want to see what's going on with the current revision, you'll see a planning unit, because I was trying to figure that out myself this morning. And so when you get to the Wreck Rivers management plan on the web, you'll see on one of the sidebars, planning unit. Click on that, you go down there, you'll see the current planning efforts, and Wreck River revision is on there. Great.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And before we sign off tonight, I'm going to flag a few other events for folks. The Wreck Rivers Advisory Board meetings, there was one today, and there have been recordings of those meetings. Then there is another from 10 a.m. to noon on March 16th, 2022, and from 10 a.m. to noon on April 20th, 2022. In addition, there are some West Susitna Road public meetings hosted by the borough, and those are virtual, and there's information on our Facebook page and through our newsletters. And those are going to be on Wednesday, February 23rd from 4 to 7. And on Wednesday, March 23rd from 4 to 7 p.m. Also, the Susitna Oil and Gas comments have been extended to March 14th, 2022, so you can get those in. And then we will have our final winter speaker event on March 22nd. And we will have Trent Sutton, who will come and talk about lamprey in the Susitna watershed. So that'll be a really fun topic to close out the winter with. So thank you again, Bruce, for being here. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for being here. And again, this has been recorded and will be shared, so you can have access to it later.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Have a night, everyone.
Good night.